Hello and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake up, or today stir, a cocktail or other mixed drink, talk a bit about its history, give it a sip, see how it tastes. We're continuing our quest to work through the IBA's list of official cocktails to see how those stand up. We're in the unforgettable section, and this week's unforgettable is the Tuxedo. Now this one, I'm not sure how unforgettable it is. It certainly still exists, but it's not a drink that I hear about too often. But that's no crime, it still is worth exploring and tasting, and that's what we're gonna do today. Now for the history section of this one, it's sort of a mixture. There's part of it that's very clear, and there's a whole lot of it that is not very clear. So back in 1885, Pierre Lorillard IV of the big tobacco family, the Lorillards, decided to open a club. And this was just outside of New York. I think it's technically in New Jersey, but 30 miles or so outside of the city, just in kind of the country there. And this club became known as the Tuxedo Club. Tuxedo here getting its name from a lake, which apparently was named in a Native American language, and it's pronounced something like Tuxedo or something like that. And that's where the word tuxedo came from, which is also where we get tuxedo as in the jacket from. That was a fashion that became popular at the Tuxedo Club. Anyway, at this exclusive fancy rich person club somewhere in New Jersey, this drink was apparently invented sometime in the late 1880s. The drink then bounces around, starts being made other places, of course, and eventually becomes famous enough to make a spot on the IBA's list. Now, what's interesting about this drink is that while we don't have any write-ups from the Tuxedo Club itself, we have a lot of write-ups of this drink, and starting fairly early. So this shows up in books as early as 1900, and then shows up in quite a few, in at least 10 more books, just over the next couple decades. So it shows up in 1904 and 1913 and 1916 and 1919 and 1931, and it's all over the place. What's interesting is no one can agree on how to make this drink at all. So all of the versions of the drink have some sort of gin and some sort of wine-based product. That's literally the end of similarities. So the earliest versions I've seen written up use a mixture of dry vermouth and Old Tom gin, which is also what the IBA calls for. However, there are other variants that use sherry instead of the vermouth. There are versions of this that call for Ginevra or Hollands gin. There are versions that call for London Dry Gin. There are versions that call for Plymouth Gin. And then what do you add to it? Well, most recipes have you add orange bitters, but a few use Angostura bitters. A few don't have any bitters. And then some add maraschino, some don't, some add absinthe, some don't. I mean, this drink is all over the place. Interestingly, it's very similar in some ways to some versions of another drink with a lot of recipes, the Turf Club. The Turf Club is often cited as the first drink to mix vermouth and gin together. And there are some recipes for a Turf Club that call for Tom gin, vermouth, maraschino, absinthe, and bitters. Exactly the same as this drink. So what I'm getting to is, who knows how they actually made it? As far as we can tell, the version at the Waldorf Astoria was sherry based, and a lot of the folks at the Tuxedo Club were related to the Waldorf Astoria, including its owner being a member of the club. So there's some thought that that's the correct original version. However, the sherry version, other than being what they served at the Waldorf Astoria, does not show up in the first 6 books that cite this drink. I also don't have any sherry, and I'm not a huge sherry fan, so we're not going to do any sherry. So we are going to go ahead and make 3 versions of this drink today. One, of course, will be the IBA spec, and then there's a heck of a lot of other versions out there, so let's make 2 of those. All right, let's get to it. All right, so for the IBA spec, as I said, this follows pretty closely some of the earliest known recipes, which is nice and kind of uncommon for the IBA specs. We're going to start with some orange bitters. I'm going to use Scrappies. We want 3 dashes thereof. Then of Luxardo Maraschino, I want about half a bar spoon. Of absinthe, we want a 1/4 bar spoon. I don't want to accidentally overshoot that, so I'm just going to do a little couple drop gated pour here. And then we come to our main ingredients. So dry vermouth, which is what almost all of the early recipes call for. There's one outlier that calls for sweet vermouth, but otherwise everyone's asking for dry. We want 30 milliliters, or about an ounce of that. And then an Old Tom gin, we want the same, about a 30 milliliter or 1 ounce pour. Let's give that a stir. And I'm going to strain that into a little Nick and Nora glass, ideally chilled. And then we need a little 2-part garnish here. We want some lemon peel. And we want a nice maraschino cherry. And cherries do show up pretty frequently in this drink from the very earliest versions. The lemon peel is actually less common, and often when it's present, it is just twisted and then discarded. But the cherry is there in almost every version. And that is the IBA spec Tuxedo. Let's give that a try. So nose is clean. I get some vermouth. I get a hint of like a citrus. Maybe there's a hair of the sweetness of the Old Tom coming through. Yeah, so it's very much in the tradition of something like a Turf Club. Like I mentioned, again, being identical. But what I mean is, in many early recipes for that, it's described as take a martini and then add a couple dashes of this, a couple dashes of that. That's really what this reads to me as, is it's a basic equal parts martini with just a hair of other stuff. So you get a little bit of that absinthe back of palate, nice, warm anisette. The maraschino and the bitters are adding a little bit of pop, different places into the flavor. Yeah, it is just an equal parts Old Tom martini with just a little bit of extra zing going on. Not at all bad, but not anything, groundbreaking. Alright, for version number 2, we're going to just make a few small changes. We're going to start off the same with some orange bitters. This time I'm going to do 2 dashes of Scrappies and 1 dash of Regan's. I just like to mix up my orange bitters. We're again going to take about a 1/2 bar spoon, maybe a hair more of, well, that is more, that is a bar spoon. We're going to take a bar spoon of maraschino liqueur. Rather than adding absinthe to this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'll atomize some into the glass before we serve. And then this time we're going to do the same with the vermouth as before. We're going to take a 30 milliliter or 1 ounce pour. But this time we're going to switch to Plymouth gin, which is what Wondrich prefers in the drink, even though he also prefers it as a sherry drink. And we are going to up the proportion to 60 milliliters, or about 2 fluid ounces. Again, this is all within the realm of different proportions and styles on this drink that are all floating around. And then we're just going to give this a nice stir. Alright, I'm going to serve this one in a coupe, and I'm just going to go ahead and give that a nice little spray of absinthe. And I'm going to strain that off. I do like how clear this is since we're stirring and everything's so clear. There's just a slight hint of color, almost an oiliness, which is the vermouth. But otherwise it's just perfectly clear. Then this one we're going to do similar things for garnish, but we're not going to present them the same. So I'm going to get rid of that nice clear thing I was just discussing. Many early recipes call for just dropping a cherry in, which I'm on board with. And I like that little thing that happens when you drop a cherry into a drink. Beautiful color. And then rather than have the peel here as part of the garnish or on top, we're just going to express it, move it around a bit, and discard. All right, so this is a different tuxedo. Nose, I'm getting gin now. Plymouth gin has some sort of rooty notes, some slightly earthy, darker spice notes, and I'm smelling that. Yeah, so it's a lot drier, obviously, with the higher proportion of gin, but Plymouth isn't quite as dry as like a London Dry. There's a hair of some sort of sweetness that does show up here. A little bit less so, though, than the last drink with the Old Tom. Yeah, flavor-wise, right at the front, you get the idea that there's something going on. It's a little bit of the vermouth botanicals. It's maybe a little bit of the maraschino or the orange bitters. There's a little bit of something happening, which then sort of opens directly into gin. And so then it's really a Plymouth gin tasting. You get some of the juniper, but also some of those earthier, more bitter botanicals. And then you're left with just a little bit of the vermouth at the end of the palate, a little bit of the absinthe there as well. It's good. Let's see what this cherry's doing for us here. Yeah, you know what? That's kind of good. I would, it's a really nice contrast. The really sweet but dark syrupy cherry in with that very dry, slightly bitter otherwise drink. That's really nice. All right, for our final variant, again, we're just gonna play a little bit within this space since there's so many options for us. And so we're gonna start out a little bit different in the bitters department. I'm gonna go ahead and again bring in both Regan's and Scrappy's bitters. We're gonna do a dash of each. Then I'm gonna add in a couple dashes of Ango. We're again gonna put in about a bar spoon of maraschino. And then this time, we're gonna make a slight vermouth change. So, I'm gonna start off with the same Dawn Dry we've been using. This time I'm just gonna use 15 milliliters, that's about half an ounce. Then I'm also going to use 15 milliliters of Dawn Blanc, which is a sweet, though yellowish white in color, and quite a bit less heavy than a traditional Rosso or Rouge vermouth. And then for gin, we're going to return to the Old Tom. And this time we're going to put this at 45 milliliters, or 1.5 ounces. I think here we're returning to the sweeter gin, and we're bringing in the sweeter vermouth as for part of it, but we're also slightly increasing our gin ratio. I think that's going to all balance out rather nicely together. Then I'm going to give it a stir. I'm going to go ahead and atomize into another Nick and Nora glass here with some absinthe. And we'll give that a strain. Ooh, lovely color here. That's the Ango primarily doing that, but it's giving us, it's almost got a reddish hue to it. That's beautiful. And I'm going to again directly add a cherry with a bit of its lovely maraschino liquid. And we'll again express some lemon. All right, so this is sort of a modern-ish take on this, I suppose. It smells a little bit sweet. There's a little bit of a spice note. Not sure what that. I think it's the maraschino and citrus together. Oh, so that's really interesting now. So now there is a sweetness that pervades the drink, but it's a really dark sweetness. It's like a, baking spices with sugar in them, sort of thing. Yeah, that really pervades the drink. You get right on the front of the drink, you get some of the sweetness of the maraschino, probably a little bit from the gin, as well as the Regan's orange bitters coming through right at the front of the drink. A little bit of a bright, sweet nose sort of to it, and then as it works back, you get that darker, more lingering sweetness, and then it ends in a slightly bitter place, slightly anisette place. Yeah, it lingers really nicely. You almost get a little bit of that cherry perhaps in there too. I like this quite a bit. Well, thank you so much for coming along this week on our journey to explore the Tuxedo and a few variations thereon. If you've got some of these ingredients knocking about the store cupboard, I would advise you to try one as well, but feel free to mess around with it and make it however makes sense to you. We'd invite you to visit the blog, shakingandsipping.com, for a write-up on this and each other drink, as well as most weeks, the day after this video posts, we'll have a write-up of IBA in real life, where we go to a local Seattle cocktail bar, see if they make it often, if they have tweaks on it, what alcohols they choose, etc. I would implore you to do all the YouTube type things, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell your friends. That would all be very appreciated. Follow on Twitter at shaking_sipping for updates on when we do IBA in real life and other things like that. And we'll be back next week with the next drink on the IBA's list. We're nearing the end of the unforgettable section, just a few weeks left. Until next week, happy sipping. Cheers.